2023's Oppenheimer tells the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, an American scientist who during World War II helped the US develop the first atomic bomb. The film shows the events leading up to, during, and after the bomb's creation to show the effects not only on the world but also on its creator. And the film is directed by Christopher Nolan, who you might know for films like Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, and the Dark Knight trilogy. And the screenplay is based on the book American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. As far as the cast goes, the cast is stacked. There are far too many people to mention in this video, so I'll just mention a handful of people and who they're playing, and then I'll rapid fire a list of names. Starting with the more obvious ones, in the role of J. Robert Oppenheimer, we have Cillian Murphy. As his wife Kitty Oppenheimer, we have Emily Blunt. As Louis Strauss, we have Robert Downey Jr. And as Lieutenant General Leslie Groves, we have Matt Damon. But now to fire off a list of names that are in this movie, you might recognize some of them. Florence Pugh, Kenneth Branagh, Jack Quaid, Alden Ehrenreich, Josh Peck, David Desmalchin, David Krumholtz, Dane DeHaan, Rami Malek, Benny Safdie. Honestly, I could keep going, but I do want to save some surprises for the people who haven't seen it yet, and I also want to save time on editing. Getting into my review, I want to start by saying this. Oppenheimer is not a war film. There's very little action, very little violence. If anything, it's much more of a political drama than a war film, and for some people that might be a disappointment, but if you know that going into it, then it might not disappoint you as much, so. Hence the reason why I said this up front. But with that out of the way, let's talk about my positives with the film, and then we'll get into my negatives, and then we'll end with my ranking. Starting with the performances, every single actor in this film gives 110%, even if they don't have that much to do in the film. But out of all the performances, the two that stand out the most to me are the performances from Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. In this role, Robert Downey Jr. shows that he's not just Iron Man, he is an actor with range and versatility. It's hard not to talk about Robert Downey Jr. in any movie he's in because he is just a standout, he is a superstar, but he's also just a great actor in general. But when it comes to Cillian Murphy, the role of Oppenheimer feels like the biggest, most boldest role he's ever played, and he plays it flawlessly. So I believe with full certainty that either Cillian Murphy or Robert Downey Jr. or both of them will get nominated for an award for their roles in this film. But moving on from the performances, the next positive I have is with the cinematography. I think it might be a bit of an understatement, but this film looks absolutely amazing. Whether it's the sweeping shots out in the desert or the shots of people talking in a room, each shot feels intentional and detailed. So yeah, when it comes to the cinematography, Christopher Nolan obviously does it right. But to go along with the cinematography, I also found the sound design to be one of the most immersive aspects of the whole movie. I saw this film in IMAX, not the 70mm like Christopher Nolan intended it to be seen, but every time there was a loud noise in the movie, the entire theater shook. And when it came down to that big bomb testing scene, the entire movie shook to the point where I thought it was actually going to explode. That's an experience I've really never had in the theater before. I haven't even had that experience at like Disney World. The amount of immersion into that sequence is something I never thought I would feel in a movie ever, and the fact that it happened still gives me goosebumps. I have goosebumps right now, honestly. That's not the only example of good sound design in this movie, but for the most part, that's the big example, so that's the only one I'll mention. But overall, I think the sound design in this film is wonderfully done. But to go along with the cinematography and sound design, we also have great visual effects in this film. Christopher Nolan is known for using mostly practical effects in his movies, and this movie here is no different. The practical effects they used in this film are some of the most breathtaking effects I've seen in any movie, just knowing that they're practical. Some of it is miniature stuff, but some of it is actually like practical, kind of recreating an atomic bomb level kind of stuff. The fact that he put the time and effort and money into these shots to make them look as real as possible just goes to show how great of a director he is, how crazy of a director he is. Even for people out there who might not like him, you have to admit that he is pretty impressive. So with the visual effects, the sound design, and also the cinematography combined, I think all of those come together perfectly to make a really entertaining film, a really immersive film, a film that's meant to be seen on the big screen, one you have to experience for yourself to fully understand. But that's all I have for my positives, so without further ado, let's get into the negatives, and then I'll get into my ranking. First negative has to be the runtime. The film is exactly 3 hours long, and I really don't think it has to be. I think if they cut out maybe 25 to 30 minutes, maybe condensed certain things, it would have played out a little bit better on screen. But especially by the time you get to that third act, it really starts to drag. That's when I started to look and see what time it was, see how much time was left in the movie. The one positive thing I will add to that, though, is that the editing did make the runtime seem a little bit more bearable, but like I said, by the time you get to the third act, it does drag a lot more. Another negative is the story structure. The story is told in a non-linear fashion, which for a film that's very talk-heavy usually means you're jumping from conversation to conversation. And when you're jumping from conversation to conversation, it is kind of easy to get certain information either lost or mixed up. With Oppenheimer, it feels as though Christopher Nolan should have told it in a linear fashion. That way, some things would have made a little more sense, some things would have connected a little bit more. But the last negative I have is that there are so many talented actors in this movie, yet at least half of them feel completely underutilized, which wouldn't be the biggest issue for me personally because not everybody needs their moment in the spotlight, not every character warrants a big scene. But when a character like Kitty Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer's wife, played by Emily Blunt, does not get that much to do throughout the entire film, it feels a little odd because for that big of a character, somebody who's married to Oppenheimer himself, it feels like she should have a lot more to do. Inevitably, she does get her big scene, but it comes towards the very end pretty much, so it really doesn't hold that much weight. You don't get much character development from her. So in a way, it feels like Emily Blunt and the character of Kitty Oppenheimer is just kind of wasted. But like I said before, I'm not the most disappointed when it comes to some other actors not getting as much to do because not every character gets a big scene. However, it is disappointing when you're excited to see somebody like Jack Quaid, for instance. I was excited to see him in the film, and he only gets maybe 2 to 3 lines. I almost have to ask, why would you cast these big name actors in such small roles to only give them 2 to 3 lines tops? But then I have to remember, oh yeah, marketing, you want to get people in the seats. But honestly, that's all I have for my negatives, so without further ado, let's get into my ranking. When it comes to 2023's Oppenheimer, I'm actually going to rank it 3 times. Once for where I think the general audience would rank it, a second time for where I think the critics would rank it, and a third time for where I would rank it. For general audiences, this is anybody who has any interest in the film but might just be interested in the explosions. I'm going to go ahead and give it a standard ticket. You may be disappointed by the lack of explosions, but you also might end up appreciating the story that they're telling. As far as where the critics would put it, I would definitely say premium ticket. This is definitely a movie that's going to get some award nominations. And when it comes to my ranking, I'm going to have to agree with those critics. This is absolutely a premium ticket. Sure, the film has its issues with the runtime, the character development, and the story structure, but I think it makes up for that with great visual effects, great performances, great cinematography, and great sound design. This is definitely a movie you have to experience on the big screen just for that bomb test scene alone. It is unlike anything I've seen in any movie for a very long time, if ever. But that's all I have for this review, so I'll pass it on to you. Have you seen 2023's Oppenheimer? Tell me down in the comments below, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you in the middle? I know it's a historical film and you can look it up online, but please don't spoil anything for the people who haven't seen it yet. And for the people who haven't seen it yet, are you planning on watching it anytime soon? Why or why not? Comment that down below as well. Really, any comments you have for me, I would love to hear from you. I respond to as much as I can. But do me a favor and leave a like on this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so I can see you in the next one.